I'm Amanda Fancy. I'm the dealer owner of Gauss Home Hardware and Furniture. We've been at this location for about a year. We started in 1848, way back when. This is our 5th location, so we've never have left the town limits. So when we're looking to build this location, we had lots of opportunity to potentially look at outside of the town limits, but it was really key for us to be and continue to be a growing business in Bridgewater. Bridgewater, Nova Scotia is unique. We have a beautiful countryside. Our town is 7,500 people, but then, our customer reach is about 45,000. So, we're talking about lots of small communities, hidden treasures. There's huge opportunity here, and I think that it's certainly worthwhile to make the visit, make the call, do some inquiring, because it certainly is somewhere where I think there would be some strong investment opportunities for sure.
My name is Joey Richard. I come from Quebec, Montreal. I've studied opera at the Montreal Conservatoire of Music, so this is where I've learned about Italian, the language, and the food. And my passion just became bigger and bigger for food. I've been cooking for 20 years, almost. I opened a family business, but the only thing I forgot is that my family is still in Montreal, so I'm like, I'm trying. I make new friends. I'm building this thing, but it is a family business here. My chef is like my brother. His wife is like my sister. So I recreated a family environment. We do the real recipes, starting from the real ingredients, and for Italian food, what the secret is. Few ingredients and very fresh. So each recipe would be like 3-4 ingredients maximum. But it's just the best ingredients and makes it so delicious. If you think that it's impossible to have your own business, I'm the living proof that it is possible. People want us to thrive. We work together. So everybody helps each other. If you want to be part of a community, it is the community to be part of.
My name is Joel Holland. I'm the owner and operator of Manitou Athletics. I found the opportunity, started this gym in my parents' garage, and now we are currently in an 8,600 square foot facility. A lot of people come here because of the community. The things that we offer here are different than a normal gym. It's an open atmosphere where you come in, the music's played over the loudspeakers, not in your ears. You don't put earbuds in and just walk around from one machine to the other. You focus on yourself, but at the same time you get to meet new people. We have 3 floors, which we do CrossFit, boot camps, athletic training, and personal training. We have so many other businesses that are growing our economy and feeding into it becoming more populated, a place where people actually stay as opposed to leave. We're growing, we're getting bigger, and a lot of people are on the same push to become a better Bridgewater. I love this place. It's my home, and there is no other place that I would want my business to be.
I'm Amanda Fancy. I'm the dealer owner of Gals Home Hardware and Furniture. We've been at this location for about a year. We started in 1848, way back when. This is our 5th location, so we've never have left the town limits. So we're looking to build this location. We had lots of opportunity to potentially look at outside of the town limits, but it was really key for us to be and continue to be a growing business in Bridgewater. Bridgewater, Nova Scotia is unique. We have a beautiful countryside. Our town is 7,500 people, but then, our customer reach is about 45,000. So, we're talking about lots of small communities, hidden treasures. There's huge opportunity here, and I think that it's certainly worthwhile to make the visit, make the call, do some inquiring, because it certainly is somewhere where I think there would be some strong investment opportunities for sure.
My name is Joey Richard. I come from Quebec, Montreal. I've studied opera at the Montreal Conservatoire of Music, so this is where I've learned about Italian, the language, and the food. And my passion just became bigger and bigger for food. I've been cooking for 20 years, almost. I opened a family business, but the only thing I forgot is that my family is still in Montreal, so I'm like, I'm trying. I make new friends. I'm building this thing, but it is a family business here. My chef is like my brother. His wife is like my sister. So I recreated a family environment. We do the real recipes, starting from the real ingredients, and for Italian food, what the secret is. Few ingredients and very fresh. So each recipe would be like 3-4 ingredients maximum. But it's just the best ingredients and makes it so delicious. If you think that it's impossible to have your own business, I'm the living proof that it is possible. People want us to thrive. We work together. So everybody helps each other. If you want to be part of a community,
Good evening, everyone. I will call this regularly scheduled meeting of Bridgewater Town Council to order. And as always, the town of Bridgewater is located in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and it is a privilege for us to be here in this community. Are there any additions or deletions to the? Well, there is an addition to the agenda. There's a land matter that was just discussed in camera that is going to be added to the agenda. And I'm going to move, if you don't mind, I'm going to move the 9.1, which is the Des Brisets Museum. I'm going to move that up to after minutes. So if everyone is okay with that, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Tanner, seconded by Councillor Caldwell. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Announcements. Well, let's start with the obvious one, and that is that over the last weekend, we had the parade, and then the next day had the fireworks, and both were a huge success. I know Patrick's inbox and mine have been flooded with messages from people in the community saying just how amazing both were. It was interesting to watch read some of the comments on the parade, the live stream, and note where those people were. Mm-hmm. The number of people in Calgary watching our parade, like it was more than a few people at West watching, which I thought was really, really kind of neat. So thank you to all the volunteers and all the organizers and the staff and Deputy Mayor Fagier for all her efforts, and without all those people, it wouldn't be the success it was. People are still talking about the fireworks. Then the other is that the Para Cup is this week, and things kicked off yesterday, and they run until Saturday afternoon. The gold medal game is Saturday afternoon. There are tickets available, I believe, for all the games still, and you can go to the LCLC website for those. Councillor McDonald was volunteering yesterday, all day, I think, and it was busy then.
It wasn't expected to get busier.
Yeah, and you'll notice that Councillor Thorburn is not here, and that is exactly where he is volunteering at the Para Cup tonight. So we are less important right now than the Para Cup for Councillor Thorburn, and that he's a volunteer at heart, so I understand why he's there and working hard. Are there any other announcements from members of council? No? All right, hearing none, we'll move to, we don't have any members of the public here to address council. The minutes of October 24th and November 14th are both there. Are there any errors or omissions with those? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as circulated? Deputy Mayor Fauchier, seconded by Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Perfect. And we are going to go down to 9.1, Des Brisé Museum Annual Report and Physical Facility Deficiencies.
Perfect. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, so as it says, I've submitted a report, and I'm going to give you the broad strokes here, but we were having some critical facility issues at the museum. I'm normally here under better circumstances telling you about all the amazing things that are happening there. As you all know, that since launching Museum 2.0 in 2018, the space has adapted to shift and meet our community's needs, as well as become a vibrant hub of activity. So today I'm here because there are fundamental issues that need to be fixed with the building as they are posing health risks to both the collection and to the people that frequent that space. So I'm just gonna, perfect. All right, so I'm gonna start just by giving a little bit of background on the building. As you may know, the building was done in 1966 as a centennial project. It's a poured-in-place concrete foundation, and the picture on the left that you're looking at is the double brick cavity walls. These are some of the blueprints. There were parts added on or enclosed, but they use the same materials and the same building techniques. Then in 2007, the concrete roof decking panels were crumbling, and they were actually falling into the museum. So the entire roof covering was replaced at that time. Most recently, there were HVAC upgrades done in 2016, and that's the picture on the right-hand side there, showing the outline of that HVAC system that runs throughout the building. So the site and building envelope have remained largely unchanged, except for the roof from 2007. And the HVAC system has required numerous ongoing repairs since the day that it went in, including leaking, user comfort, humidity, and very steep temperature spikes. Okay? So this is severely limiting our ability to function as a heritage institution. And as I pointed out earlier, it is cause for problems and risks to both our collection, our staff, volunteers, and public. So these are some of the examples of some of the conditions that we have experienced and are experiencing. We have water damage coming through, as you can see on the left-hand side there. Those are ceiling tiles that are in place in the Heritage Gallery, so that's one part of the system. We have condensation forming on walls and floors at times, creating very slippery surfaces. We have doors that are swelling so that they don't properly open or close. As you go along here, we've had leaking in the collection storage room. We've had water on the floors, again from that bulkhead in the Heritage Gallery. And we have efflorescence deposits on the interior buildings due to high humidity and collection storage. This here reflects the relative humidity of the 2021 to 2022 year. That blue band in the middle there is what we should be at. We are hoping to be at 50% relative humidity, and it's acceptable to be 5 above or below that, so 45 to 55 range. And this is actually very close to what you would recommend in a domestic household. And you can see that blue and that gray line there, one of it is collection storage, where all of our objects lived, and one of them is a heritage gallery, where we have our permanent displays. There are very deep spikes, and short-term, like really dramatic spikes, are very damaging, but these levels are cumulative over a longer period of time. So in this period, we're as low as 20 relative humidity and as high as 80% relative humidity, okay? So what's happened here is now we've seen the development of mold in our collection. So these are some of the various examples of items in which this has happened, and we are approximating that 10% of the collection is being affected by this. So what have we done here? We haven't stood idly by. We have reviewed a variety of reports, which are included in the original package. One of them was a building and energy audit done in 2014. Another one was a report completed in 2017. In my time, since I've been with the museum in 2018, I've had the original engineer from the HVAC system down for multiple site visits. I've hired 3 separate HVAC firms to try and help and resolve these issues with the system. You know that we brought in a recommissioning study in 2020. That study specifically looked at energy consumption and the fluctuations regarding heating and ventilation. And again, in the fall of September of last year, we brought all 4 people back to the site. We brought in our HVAC company locally that does work. We brought the engineer, and we had the controller who sets up the rooftop units in terms of how they're regulated, as well as facility staff from TOB. Most recently, in 2022, we had an individual come in who really specializes in humidifications, and he observed the issues that we have of leaking in our ductwork, and you know, basically said that we've got psychometric issues within the ductwork, and made some recommendations there in terms of replacing the entire humidifier units. So we're constantly calling people in and looking for both internal expertise in town staff, but also external individuals in our community who were part of the project. We have taken some steps. One of the steps we took was that we moved over to rolling storage system in 2022. We got a grant in 2021. Rolling storage, with the way that those items are on the shelves, means that we could better look at them, do collection reporting, condition reporting, and it also allows for greater airflow. We cleaned all of the artifacts, or the ones that had obvious mold, based on the Canadian Conservation Institute and the Canadian Conservation Consortium's recommendations of steps to follow. Okay. So also what we've done is we've brought on a member to our staff who's grant funded, and this is their job. Their job is specifically to deal with collection care and to accumulate knowledge and best practice through a variety of consultations with outside heritage organizations. Some who have experienced similar problems, and others who are much more deeply rooted and have a longer time in the field. So we have also put up humidistats in every single room. So we've purchased them for rooms that didn't have them, and we track those numbers daily. And we have installed dehumidification dehumidification units in every single room that has exterior walls, including this one you can see here on the right-hand side, which is a commercial unit that's in our collection storage. And this is all in an effort to manage those temperatures and humidity levels so that they're within a range that is acceptable, and so that we're not seeing these reoccurring conditions in our space. So what do we have going for us? I will say that we have a roof, okay, and although that roof is maybe not insulated to what we would recommended today, it does have a continuous adhered air barrier, okay, so it's got that. We got a roof on top of us. We know that our HVAC system has given us considerable energy savings, and that further upgrades could see improvements to greenhouse gas reductions. We do know that our exterior thermal resistance in our walls is only half of the value that was set out in 2007, and this is all coming out of a 2014 report that was done by the town. And we know that our 4 heat pumps on the roof should be adequate for the square footage of the museum, which is approximately 6,500 square feet. Okay. So now we've hit a point where we're kind of at a critical mass, and staff were advised in September by field experts that based on the spread of mold in the collection, that we should no longer be handling artifacts because it could pose a serious health risk. So at that time, we made the difficult decision to close the collection storage room, and we referred this issue on to the town's Occupational Health and Safety Committee. That collection storage room is self-contained, and it does have, it's designed to have independent ductwork. So we are still existing in other spaces, but as you could see from the photos before, the water is in a heritage gallery, condensation in the floors is in our community room. The conditions are widespread throughout. So for us, what this means right now is that we can't access our collection. So it affects exhibits, it affects our ability to do educational programming, conduct research. People can't see the items that they've donated, and we're unable to accept new artifacts. So we're here because you can help us save our community history. We've exhausted both museum and municipal staff resources, and this problem isn't going away, and we are looking to find a resolution here. We are very confident that we have done everything that we can do, and we've been very diligent, but there is an urgency to the situation. So I'm here today to request that council approve the unbudgeted amount of $30,000 for a firm to be brought in to consult on the HVAC system and building envelope. This review would be of everything as a whole, so how it's operating together, not simply the individual parts, which some of those previous reports touched on, but how the HVAC system works within the fabric of our building. I will say that when the roof was done in 2007, there was consideration for the building to have better insulation in the walls, and as well as in 2014, the report that was done made the recommendation for there to be a wrap put on the building, because we know that the building is very porous. It's a beautiful mid-century, modern, low-profile building. However, it is sitting in the lowest point of the property, so water runs towards the building, as well as us being confident that the foundation itself has no insulation. Okay. So I'm going to stop there. If we have questions, Kirk is here to answer them from a more facility side of things, and I will do my best as well.
Questions from members of council? Kind of a lot there. Yes, Councilor McDonald.
So I just want to make sure that I understand correctly the difference between the consultation that you're looking for now and the ones that have been done in the past is that this is just looking at it overall and not piece by piece.
Yes.
Are you expecting much to be different in that? I mean, what are you hoping the difference will be?
I'm hoping, and I'm looking back, and I'm not an expert in this field, but I'm seeing that at 2 points in time there was a recommendation to wrap the building. And we know that there isn't enough air tightness, didn't pass the air test or HVAC system. And we know that it's very underserved and that this moisture is coming in from the outside. So the outcome is that looking how to make the fabric or the framework of the building work with the rooftop units. We have a modern HVAC system, and it is meant for a building that would have a greater amount of insulation and air tightness. So it could itself be, these two things could be in direct conflict with one another.
So we've got the wrong system for the building.
The building is 60 years old now, and it hasn't had any major updates except for a new roof in 2007.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So if a previous report said to wrap it, you're expecting this report to say the same thing? Or
I don't know, Jennifer. I've had so many people through, and I've done so many repairs to heat pumps, and I just don't know. Yeah. We did bring in the individual most recently who looked at the humidification because we know that we have this psychometric issue in the ductwork. So actually in the ductwork there's wands in there so that when it gets really dry, they'll disperse moisture into the air, but that moisture, instead of being airborne, is being turned back into liquid, and it's actually coming through the seams of the ductwork, and that's what's creating the puddling in the Heritage Gallery. Okay.
Just a question on time frame. So there is some, I guess, urgency to find a resolution, as you indicated. Any idea as to the time frame to get a report, a detailed report would be?
I'm not sure.
Come on down.
By the time we get reports or an RFP done and out to tender back to you folks, it's probably 2 months at the earliest. So we're looking at February, March before we can come back with a hopeful solution.
Okay.
And this is, I would point out, this is the driest season, so the mold levels hopefully, we can't say for sure, but hopefully won't drastically increase. Once the mold has hold, it's continually growing unless it's dealt with. But in the driest seasons, it doesn't grow as steadily.
Right.
Every summer season, we're coming back to this.
Mm.
We think that we've dealt with it. We thought that we resolved it before we did rolling storage, and we're here again. So what we're doing right now is we're triaging the symptoms. We're not actually treating the root cause.
Right.
So we're looking for a root cause solution.
Sure. Yeah.
And I will say that we are actively looking for grant funding. Should you decide to allocate $30,000, we have, we've looked at some grant funding, and we're looking to put that as our contribution towards a greater pool of funding that might see us get up to $200,000. Now, we're still in very preliminary stages with that, but we are working as many angles as possible.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
This is going to sound like, bear with me as I go through this. I'm not supportive of the $30,000 for a study because I think we have to look at the bigger picture here. I'd rather sit down and have a bigger discussion on do we need to change the entire building? So when I say that, I'm not saying I don't want to spend $30,000 because I want to handicap the museum. It's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. So I think looking at a $30,000 study, that's going to probably tell us the same as the other studies. We can just, if we just want to wrap the building, then we might as well just say, we've had enough studies. I think you said 2 studies said wrap the building.
Well, one study said wrap the building, and then there were notes in a 2007 report that I pulled up that suggested that there needed to be more exterior installation.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me, we could just, today, we could save $30,000 and just go right to that. I don't think that addresses anything that's coming up from the bottom. So to me, if I look at the bigger picture, which is we have a lack of community space, we have seniors that are lacking community space, you could use more event space. Is the better solution, instead of $30,000 for a study that's going to lead to, let's face it, a few $100,000 in repair, is the better use of our resources to start going after funding? And I talked to someone earlier about the millions of dollars the province was prepared to spend on the art gallery in the city. Is there some funding that we can tap into to have it so the building, this problem is solved, and so whether it's a new building or something like that, to, instead of Band-Aid fixes. The
Okay.
Band-Aid fixes over and over is not going to help the collection.
No.
And the thought of spending 30,000, then a couple $100,000, to then find out 2 or 3 years from now, we have to do it again. I'd rather look at those options. How do we solve this once and for all? Make sure the museum and the collection, right? Talk about our community's history. Make sure our community's history is protected, but do it in a way that addresses some of the other concerns that we keep hearing about. And again, I'll go back to community space. How many of us have heard from a community group, do you know where I can set up? Do you know where I can hold a meeting? We don't have some of those things, and this is a great location. So to me, before I'm able to support the expenditure of this, I want to have that bigger discussion. And to Kirk's point, we have a little bit of time in the low humidity time of the year, because I don't know where council sits on that, but I think that's at least where I am. Councilor McDonald.
I was in very much the same mind frame, and why I was asking is, are we thinking that there could be something brand new that's going to come out of this study? And I know I was kind of questioning how much money has already been invested in HVAC, thinking of timelines and budgets and rising costs. Are we going down a road of just sinking money and not really addressing the issue ever at any point? Maybe the building's just done for that purpose. Maybe it's just not usable as a museum at this point. So, yeah, we need the actual solution, not necessarily that Band-Aid. That's exactly where my thought process was going, that maybe that building just isn't it anymore.
So I look at what Museum 2.0 did for the museum, right? It kind of like took us to the next level. Is Museum 3.0 having a look at a bigger, and maybe the answer is, well, we can't do a new building because it's just too cost prohibitive, and we go back to the original plan. But I'd rather look at a bigger, more permanent solution than throw $30,000 at a report that's going to probably say wrap the building and still not address the floor, which is probably has moisture coming up. Like those slab on grade buildings, they're like a sponge, right? They take it out of the ground and it comes up, and none of this addresses that.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it would also involve, I'm going to be very clear, but drainage around the building. I once sent a picture to somebody in Public Works because there were ducks swimming outside my window, and it was kind of cute, but it was also like, hey, can we flush the drains on this one part of the building? Because,
Yeah.
I've got wildlife.
Yeah, so that's my worry, and I think that's what I'm hearing from Councilor McDonald at least as well, is that we could do all these things and it doesn't address some of the other things, and then it will be you coming back next year going, thanks for this, now I need this, and we're still not addressing it. Anyway, I've spoken enough.
Knowing that whether it's renovation or potentially a new building, whatever the solution turns out to be, that we've got a collection at risk and we've got staff at risk, that the collection area can be sealed off, so staff are,
It's closed.
okay.
We're going to get some more testing done. That's happening hopefully very imminently here. But yes, that is our understanding at this point in time, that it has its own air system and it's in its own room.
So in my mind, the emergency funding that we may need right now is to remove the collection and put it somewhere safe. while we have this conversation and to make sure we're making the right moves, not the fast, quick.
I appreciate
Quick
that.
fix.
I respect that. Yeah.
Because that needs to be protected. We need to know staff are safe first, the collection is protected, and somewhere where it can be kept safe, and I know finding space for that is not going to be easy. I think Fisheries Museum has dealt with that struggle as well, so it's not going to be a simple find, but that may be where focus needs to be right now. And you're better to tell me that, but if that's where we need to turn the funds, that would be.
That was the conversation I had with Patrick today, is that money better spent putting the collection into some climate-controlled storage while a solution is found? And certainly I think maybe that would be better. That deals with the
Yes.
immediate need,
Yeah.
while we have maybe a less rushed conversation about the very
The
long-term
building.
future of the
Okay.
museum. I don't know what the thoughts are on the table.
Linda,
Councillor
did we
Tanner.
have this problem prior to the HVAC being installed? So it's clearly an air handling issue. That's like it's.
I would also say that there's global warming, right? We
Well,
had
you
like
can
a
see from your
22
graph that
degree
there are some-
in November. Like that's unheard
Yeah.
of to have 22 degrees Celsius in November, right? I mean, the building, I'm going to speak, but it's kind of a sieve, like it's brick. It's
Yeah.
very breathable. It's
Yeah.
got this poured cement foundation, so
Yeah.
it's more readily affected by those exterior conditions as well.
Well, you can almost see by your graph that the system looks like it's having trouble trying to keep up with the fluctuations. So, okay.
Councillor Caldwell.
I like these suggestions. I'm just wondering what staff feels about this.
I think that the suggestion of finding a safe holding space for the collection at this time resolves that sense of urgency, right? Because that's the urgency, is that we're going to hit the summer season again, and that we do want to, these are precious items that have been entrusted to us, and as all of you know, this museum got accredited, which is a huge, huge feat, which really had elevated us to the place of an industry leader to follow in the footsteps of. And yeah, so we want to ensure, like all of you, that we do this right, but that we are taking, ensuring that we are doing what we can to, stop the spread.
So can we, maybe if council's indulgence, perhaps it is for staff to go back, get some quotes on
Storage.
safe, self-contained, climate-controlled storage, come back, council can debate, that'll be an unbudgeted expenditure, so if you need council's approval for that, have that conversation, and then we'll circle back with staff, with the museum commission to talk about what is the goal. If it's just if the building is the important thing to maintain as well, then we have to figure out to do that. But I get a sense that collection is the priority and the building is just perhaps a building. But does that make sense for staff to source out some safe storage options and then come back?
Sorry, I'm missing step 2. So what is step 2 then?
For the building?
Yeah.
Well, I think
you remove the collection. That's great, but
Yeah.
it's still the problem.
Well, so I guess it's to have a conversation of do we then want to look at solving the problem within the building envelope that's there, or what are the other options? So in my head, I keep thinking, let's say this is a $500,000 solution. Do you want to spend $500,000 on a 60-year-old building when there might be funding opportunities to create a different kind of space that not only addresses the museum's issues, but addresses some of the community's issues? And maybe the answer is no, but I'd rather not jump to spending a large sum of money without answering the questions for what the other options are. Does that make sense?
So do we still need the assessment then of what Lynette is recommending, where we would, in order to find out if it is a $500,000 solution, we would have to have some form of assessment that would give us that idea about what's required to maintain it, or do we want to punt it to a discussion session and unpack it all?
I think I'd rather punt it to a discussion session and unpack it all, just because we haven't had
Yeah.
a lot of time around this table to have a discussion about that. But if we already know from other reports that there is work to be done. So, like I said originally, you could just save the $30,000 if you had a report that said wrap the building, then you could do that. But I just think there's more we can look at. Jennifer?
Could we ask staff to kind of pull some of that information from those reports over the years? We know pricing's not going to be, if we get a report today, pricing is not going to be what it is when we go to actually do repairs. But just to pull some of that information together from multiple reports or findings or visits, so that we understand what has been invested, what needs to be done that we're aware of.
Would you like those reports circulated? If we can get the 2007 and
There's a 2014 and 2017. I've got a bunch of them.
Okay,
I will circulate them.
If you could send those to Ms. Porter-Lowe, and then we'll get those circulated to council.
I can also provide, let's call it a summary listing of the facts and figures that we do know. We don't have figures on what some of those things would cost, but I can definitely give you,
Yeah, and then
a shortened
if we
list.
can involve Kirk and some others, then not to put you on the spot, Kirk, and I wouldn't expect you to say X piece of equipment costs X dollars, but you would have more knowledge to be able to say that's a $100,000 fix or that's a $10,000 fix kind of thing, at least to get us, because those prices, we won't have prices from those reports.
So are we talking about getting a ballpark on the building wrap? Like, without going to RFP, just trying to understand what that would cost as an example?
I think it makes sense to know that if we did all the things that we were suggested that be done back in one of those reports, 2014, what does that look like in today's dollars?
Yeah. Okay.
And then perhaps Kirk and others can look at it and say it doesn't address the floor, it doesn't address the drainage around the bit, like all those things are add-ons, then we might get a clearer sense that a repair of the building is not much cheaper than a replacement of the building. Just like we had with a couple of other items over the last couple of years where buying used was not any better than buying new, for example. And if it's more cost effective to solve it once and for all, we should probably at least have that option. Because right now, I don't think we have that option.
Does the fact that an air handling unit's been put in place on the building since, when was that put in place?
2016.
2016, does that impact the findings in those reports in any way, in terms of recommended solutions? I'm just wondering if it might lead us down a road that's the wrong road.
They would certainly have based any calculations off of the energy performance of the pre-installed, which was early to mid-90s, I think the last system was installed. So that calculation would have to be redone, but I would also say the 2 or 3 reports that we have they were based off of energy efficiency,
Right.
not the actual building envelope or trying to determine a cause or solution for the cause. So they were very high level.
So
They didn't delve into the weeds trying to figure out exactly what. They just said wrapping it, more insulation, wrapping the exterior is going to give you this much more energy efficiency.
As opposed to the performance of the building in terms of the moisture problems and stuff that we're having.
Yeah. Because if we simply wrap the building, we could
cause more
damage something
problems.
else. So,
That's I guess what I'm wondering is if it's inevitable that we would have to have that another assessment done, given all the changes that have happened since.
so we'd have to have at least some portion of it
Re-looked at?
recalculated, yes.
Okay.
I guess I go back to the priority right now is to get the collection somewhere where this is not going to impact its future.
Yeah, so what I'm taking away here is that the first step is to come back to council with the costing for climate-controlled storage for the movement of the collection, which will, give it its time. It's going to preserve and also provide time. The second step would be to come back to a discussion session and bring some more of that information and talk about different options in terms of what we know about the building, what it needs, what that costs, but also other options to think about whether or not this is a space that, as you put, we want to continue to put Band-Aids on, or if we want to resolve the issue through replacement. Okay, I did say it's a 60-year-old building. And there are things about it that we cannot change. And then after that, then we'll, at that point in that discussion session, I guess there'll be more feedback as to what our next step is.
Yeah, and then we can, I mean, it may be that we end up going back down this path, but moving the collection buys us time. Because I think this is a little bit more complicated than, yeah. Is everyone okay with that? Any other questions? Do we need your direction to staff to pursue those options?
Yep.
Yeah.
And to refer the matter to a discussion session.
Okay. Does someone make a motion to direct staff to gather quotes on the safe storage of the collection, and also to refer this to a future discussion session? Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Conklin. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, we are down to planning items, and we've got a couple here. So development agreement for 287 King Street, first consideration.
Good evening, Council. I'm here this evening to talk to you about a proposed development agreement for 287 King Street. So the location is 287 King Street along King at the corner of what was formerly Cornwallis and now Crescent. You can see on the picture there, the site is outlined in red, and I would note how tight the lot lines are to the edges of the building. That's going to be important later when we're talking about the development agreement. So the building is very close to the edge of the lot. It's formerly known as Cobbler's Corner, so it's formerly a cobbler's establishment. There's limited parking and landscaping options on the site as a result of the tight lot lines. So the change of use we're looking at is to enable retail and personal service shops. Currently only cobbler or leatherworking is enabled on the current site. This development agreement will enable retail and personal services shops, which will make it a much broader use. The proposed business is the Golden Apothecary, a community-based wellness store. It'll be have room for naturopaths, herbalists, natural dietitians, spiritual guidance, and local artisans. There will be various workshops put on in the building, as well as items available for sale. So here's a picture out in front of the building. You'll note on the one side there is some existing landscaping over there. So there's existing bushes on the one side that provides some separation between the other address, the adjacent property on King Street. So, as I mentioned, the site is quite small, 4,300 square feet. The existing building is just shy of 1,600 square feet. Limited opportunity for landscaping with some existing buffering. There's also some buffering along the rear of the property, so there's a grassy strip behind the building. Under the land use bylaw, usually 5 vehicle parking stalls will be required. However, given how constrained the site is, we're only looking at asking for 4 vehicle stalls to be provided, a reduction of 1. The bicycle parking requirements will be maintained at 2 parking stalls for bikes. So the current zoning is C8 special commercial. So the special commercial, as council may remember, is a somewhat unusual designation in that it only really permits the existing use. So any other uses require development agreements, which is one of the reasons why I'm here tonight to talk about a development agreement for a fairly small project. So the development agreements are required for most other C8 uses. The development agreement. So we're talking about permitted uses, looking at the landscaping and buffering, parking and access as well. Sorry. So the permitted uses were as requested, retail and public service or personal service shop, landscaping and buffering. There are some landscaping requirements that we've taken a look at. But again, because the site is so constrained and it's so tight on the 2 sides, there's very limited opportunity to do much in the way of landscaping. We had a public participation meeting. No one attended or registered, and we've had no other public input to date on this. Policy-wise, currently under the municipal planning strategy, it's designated medium-density residential. That's in keeping with the general neighborhood. The general character of the neighborhood is mixed-density residential. So some of the ones we'll be taking a look at quickly are compatibility of use, compatibility of building, landscape and buffering, adequacy of infrastructure, and active transportation and parking. So we took a look through all of those various elements as we were going through the development agreement process. Compatibility of use, it works well in the surrounding area. There are not many other commercial uses, but there are mixed mixed densities of residential. The building has been existing for over 100 years, most likely, so it's going to be staying more or less the same. Landscaping and buffering, again, it's going to be staying more or less the same. No major exterior changes are planned. The infrastructure changes, again, no significant changes, no increased use of water, no increased wastewater generation, no increased stormwater generation, no increased traffic generation. There are also some transportation linkages as well. The property does front onto a sidewalk. We talk about to ensure all developments are permitted, make sure they are adequately serviced. So we have ensured that. Speak the policy of council to require all new parking stalls of 4 or more to have landscaping standards. This again, because of the constrained site, we found it very difficult to look at our landscaping standards and to apply them to this particular development. So there are no landscaping standards for this parking lot. Requiring all landscaping. Right, so the landscaping, again, we're asking them to maintain what they already have there, but there will be nothing added. The only changes to the exterior that are planned are for the signage. The signage will change from the current commerce sign to the new business sign. Otherwise, on the front of the building, there is no changes proposed. Also, going back to the lot line conversation, there was, the lots are quite a bit lying as far back from King Street, so it's tricky to do the access as well. So for the parking lot, the access will remain essentially the same as well. So speaking again to the commercial development policies, this is a permitted use by a development agreement for personal service shops and retail service shops up to 1,000 square feet on corner lots of arterial or collectors. King Street is an arterial and it is a corner lot, so it checks both of those boxes. No new non-residential floor area that exceeds 40%. It's already existing entirely non-residential. There's no expanded or outdoor storage. There are no expected nuisances. There are no changes to the exterior in terms of the height or bulk, and the signage will be consistent with the land use bylaw. As I mentioned, no significant infrastructure impacts. So our next steps would be to look to schedule a public hearing on this development agreement, if council is eager to hear that. Our recommendation is to proceed with this development agreement. A draft of the development agreement was attached in the council package, and I will be happy to take any questions you may have on this development.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor McDonald?
One on the sidewalk there. I can't clearly envision it from memory, but is it one where the sidewalk is not very clearly defined from the parking lot, and is there anything that we can request be done? We've seen it in other developments.
So that's the pictures, but as you can see, there is a sidewalk in the front of that picture. The problem is at the lot line. If you look where the fire hydrant is, I'm pretty sure it's behind there. So saying that we would want a sidewalk, the sidewalk would then go in on the applicant's property and then pop back. It would be very awkward. So that whole intersection we need to possibly take a look at, depending on when the infrastructure is being upgraded in that area. That car that's sitting on the side of that building there is actually in the right of way. It's not actually on private property. That's in the street. So that's what I mean by this site is unusual. So all the lot lines are way step back, and we don't have the ability to say to an applicant, we want you to build on town land.
Right.
Councilor Caldwell.
My question was also about the sidewalk,
Okay.
so.
Any other comments or questions? It's Deputy
So,
Mayor.
yeah, sorry. So do you actually define where the parking spaces are by lines or anything, or is it not required? Okay.
So for the most part, it's just change in signage.
It's mostly a change in use. If this wasn't a C8 zone, it would have gone through the development permit process. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councilor Tanner.
I move that council of the town of Bridgewater give first consideration to the development agreements as contained in Appendix A of document 22-148A for 287 King Street, and schedule a public hearing during the regularly scheduled council meeting on January 16th, 2023.
Thank you. Wow, 2023.
2023.
Do I have a seconder? Councilor Conklin. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're down to 6.2, development agreement with 370 Jubilee Road, planning analysis report.
Hello. So this application is for a master planned community at 370 Jubilee Road. So a little bit larger. The intent is for 886 units made up of townhouses and multi-unit residential buildings. So you can see on the map here, the property is outlined in red. It's 36.85 acres, and the property abuts Jubilee Road, Exhibition Drive, Dufferin Street, and Westmount Heights. It nearly connects to Micmac Avenue, but there's a parcel of private property in between. You can see the municipal boundary shown as well. It's in the dotted yellow line, so small parts of the property are outside of the town. And the lot is currently composed of a forested area, a water course, and a more open field. So as I said, the application is to construct 886 residential units. The applicants are proposing 9 multi-unit buildings with a total of 822 units in those. And those would range between 70 and 114 units per building and would be either 5 or 6 stories. They're also proposing 9 townhouse buildings, and this would include 26 townhouse units and 38 stacked townhouse units. The development would be constructed through 3 phases. There's no proposed unit mix at this stage, as the applicant intends to determine the breakdown based on market conditions. Parkland dedication is required through subdivision bylaw, so an area of the property has been proposed to be maintained as a natural area. So the property is zoned as comprehensive residential, or R3, in the land use bylaw, and the land use bylaw permits 25 units per acre for this zone by development agreement. The property is also designated as comprehensive residential on the future land use map of the municipal planning strategy, and the surrounding zoning is single and 2-unit residential, comprehensive residential, high-density residential, general commercial, park, and institutional, so there is a mix in that area. And the surrounding uses are single-unit dwellings, multi-unit residential dwellings, woodland gardens, the exhibition grounds, and some commercial uses along Dufferin Street. So I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide. It's the proposed site plan for the property. The developer is proposing 2 new public streets. You can see here, one running up from the intersection of Olympiad Avenue and Jubilee Road, connecting up to Westmount Heights, and I'll refer to that as Street A. And the second one is connecting from Street A towards Micmac Avenue, but of course it can't connect, so there'd be a turning area there. Based on the town's design and construction standards, local streets require a sidewalk on one side, and that is being proposed on these streets. Additionally, a mid-block crosswalk is being proposed where the active transportation trail in the park, which I'll talk about later, intersects with Exhibition Drive, which is across from Woodland Gardens. This would be required unless deemed unsuitable by the town engineer. So this site plan shows the proposed location of the 9 multi-unit buildings and the 9 townhouse buildings. So I'll just give a little overview. These ones at the bottom here along Exhibition and Jubilee Road are all multi-unit, as well as the purple ones and the kind of brownish tan colored ones closer to the top. And then the small red buildings here are the townhouses, and the smaller blue ones up there are stacked townhouses. So the multi-unit residential dwellings that are proposed along Jubilee Road and Exhibition are proposed to be 6 stories, and the other ones further in are proposed to be 5 stories. The townhouse units, as I mentioned, are shown kind of clustered in the middle and at the top. And I'll mention that as the land use bylaw permits 25 units per acre, with this size of property, that actually results in 921 units. So this is that is higher than the unit count being proposed, and that would be included in the development agreement. There's no proposed designs or elevation drawings for any of the buildings. Again, the applicant intends to review market conditions at the time and base it off of that. As per the subdivision bylaw requirements for parkland, a park is being proposed, and you can see that here connecting from Street A all the way down to Exhibition Drive. There's currently a water course that runs through this area. They've also proposed an active transportation connection, which you can see in that dotted green line going through the park. The road network and traffic were analyzed for the development agreement process. Jubilee Road and Exhibition Drive are collector streets, which intend to collect traffic from nearby local streets. With new development happening over the last few years on Jubilee Road, there has been some concerns from residents about the amount of traffic on the street, but as it is a collector street, the intention is for it to continue to keep collecting traffic. Westmount Heights and Centennial Street are local streets. Centennial Street is the one that just comes off of Westmount Heights and connects down to Dufferin. And those are intended to accommodate lower volumes of traffic and provide access to the majority of building lots in an area. So this is the proposed phasing plan. As I mentioned, it would be done through 3 phases. And so I will, later in the presentation, be referencing these phases. So I'll just say that phase 1 is shown in orange and includes those multi-unit buildings I mentioned along Jubilee and Exhibition, as well as the parkland. Phase 2 is shown in purple and includes some of the townhouses and 2 of the multi-unit buildings. And phase 3 is shown in green and includes the street heading up towards Micmac Avenue, the stacked townhouse units, and 2 multi-unit buildings. Each phase is planned to be constructed within 10 years each, with a timeline of 30 years maximum. There are also sub-phases within each phase, and they are identified by the letter, so like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. And the developer would have to construct the phases in order, but not the sub-phases, so those could be done wherever in that larger phase. So a public participation meeting was held on March 9th at 6 p.m. It was held virtually at that time, and 10 members of the public attended, and there was 5 people there on behalf of the applicant as well. So the main points were support for the parkland, questions on the construction timeline, concerns regarding traffic resulting from the development on Westmount Heights, concern regarding stormwater management of the area, concern for the area's current walkability and the increase in vehicular traffic and how that would affect the walkability. Concern regarding existing right-of-way easements, so that was a very specific property and that's been since resolved. Concern that the town is not focusing on a larger picture approach to traffic through development agreements, and a question about the ability to connect to Micmac Avenue. So staff completed a policy analysis, which can be found in the report. The R3 zone in which this development is located is focused on ensuring that most of the town's undeveloped land outside of the downtown core will support future residential development. There were general and residential development policies that staff analyzed, including minimizing conflicts between land uses, considering compatibility with adjacent properties, supporting a full range of housing options and styles, requiring amenity space in the development, promoting residential densification, encouraging context-sensitive residential infill, and encouraging compact urban form and adaptive reuse of an area. There were also policies about open space in the environment, including integrating the development with appropriate landscaping, requiring the transfer of open space through subdivision, so that's that parkland dedication, retaining existing trees, protecting watercourses, and looking at stormwater management. For policies regarding transportation, there was reviewing the adequacy of the street network and the active transportation infrastructure. Was included, looking at requiring parking, requiring sidewalks and walkways in the development, constructing new streets to town standards, prohibiting new cul-de-sacs and dead ends, and limiting future residential street blocks. So a little bit more specifically about traffic or transportation, a traffic impact study was required and was reviewed by the engineering department. It identified, it reviewed the surrounding area and identified some improvements that may need to happen to lessen the impact of the development. So staff are aware that there are existing issues in the area. A 2021 intersection study and other analysis has been completed, and it showed that improvements may be warranted in the area separate from this proposed development. And in this traffic impact study, it was identified that traffic signals should be installed at the intersection of High Street and Dufferin Street. However, this may be required in the coming years with typical traffic growth without traffic generated by this development, so that's what their traffic impact study was showing. Similarly, traffic lights were identified to be necessary at High Street and Dominion Street. However, there's already an agreement in place for that work to be done with another development. A southbound turning lane and a northbound left turning lane, both left turning lanes, have been said to be warranted at the intersection of Dufferin Street and Centennial Street. And currently, no additional traffic coming from Centennial Street is proposed for the first phase of the development. The street wouldn't connect yet until phase 2, so the turning lane heading onto Centennial wouldn't have to happen until later in the development. And it stated in the traffic impact study that the other turning lane would be associated with the development on the other side of the road, Old Town Hills. So final confirmation of any required upgrades would be determined during the detailed design and permitting phase. So for infrastructure, there are requirements that stormwater must be self-contained on the property, and that flows occurring after the development is completed can't be more than what has existed previously. So a stormwater management plan has been submitted and reviewed, but a final one would be required to be approved prior to any development permits. The wastewater betterment charge bylaw would be applied as with any other development. A downstream analysis was also completed to understand if the physical infrastructure can support the proposed development. So it shows that infrastructure improvements would be necessary, and this would be at the cost of the developer. So this is a fairly complex multi-phase development agreement, so I am going to go into details about what has been included in the development agreement. So the development agreement outlines the permitted use, and as I mentioned, there would be a maximum of 886 residential units. A maximum of 822 of those would be in multi-unit dwellings on a minimum of a 35.44 acre parcel. So that's different than the property size. And that's because, I guess staff included a maximum number of multi-unit dwellings to include some variety, hopefully in unit types. It gives the developer a little bit of flexibility to change their dwelling types in the future if they wanted, and keep the multi-unit limited. The minimum parcel size, as I mentioned, is smaller than the current parcel. And that's because if any of the parcel were to be subdivided, that would be the maximum area, the minimum area required to keep the area at that 25 units per acre that is permitted in the R3 zone. The development agreement also states that a minimum of 20% of the units in phase 1 shall be 2 or more bedrooms. As I said, the unit breakdown hasn't been determined yet, so staff wanted to ensure that there's a certain amount of units that would be suitable for larger families. So the development agreement includes building characteristics for multi-unit dwellings as well as townhouses. And these specifics were included in lieu of any elevation drawings, which normally would be submitted for a development agreement process. But as I mentioned, because of the length of the development agreement and the development, the developer was not completing any detailed design of the buildings as they wanted to base it off the market later. So staff provided some urban design guidelines with an aim to leave some flexibility, but also encourage engaging in development in the area. So the requirements for multi-units are that the maximum height would be 6 stories. The ground floor story would be at street line grade. And this is included because there's quite steep slopes in the property, and staff wanted to avoid really tall exposed foundations that would just kind of be a blank wall along the street. All multi-unit dwellings shall include primary entrances on all facades oriented towards and abutting a public street, exclusive of some of the buildings. And so that's why I included the picture of the site plan here. So, for example, the two shown in blue here, they wouldn't need a main entrance on Jubilee Road because the main entrance would actually kind of be facing each other up the driveway, so that was excluded. And also the ones on the corner of Street A and Jubilee Road, because they are facing 2 streets, they would only require entrances on Street A, which is the new street. However, this would not remove the need for entrances on Jubilee Road because the development agreement states that all ground floor units that are abutting a public street would need individual entrances facing that street, so for all of those ground floor units. To ensure variation along the street, there would need to be varying vertical architecture, which means using different facade materials or projections to break up that long space of the building. Windows and doors shall occupy no less than 25% of any facade. And the multi-units abutting a public street would need a minimum of a 6-foot step back at the base of the 4th story on the facades that are oriented to the street, again, to just kind of break up the scale of that building. So there are also a few points for building characteristics for townhouses. So there would also be that requirement for varying vertical architecture where units are separated by a common vertical wall. And the second point for townhouses would be that garages could not project from the main wall of the dwelling. And so these 2 requirements, as well as the ones for the multi-units, are to help create a more walkable, welcoming environment along the street. So as well as building characteristics, the DA also outlines property characteristics. So there's a minimum front yard, maximum front yard setback of 40 feet for multi-unit dwellings, excluding there is one building that's set quite far back. It's tucked behind another one, so that one is excluded. And the intent is to bring buildings closer to the street to create a more engaging street, but also considering the requests from the developer of what they would need for their buildings. There would need to be paved pedestrian access adjacent to driveways for the buildings that connect to their streets with their driveways. That's a little bit confusing, but there are some driveways where it's anticipated that people will walk along the driveway from the street to the building, so we want to see sidewalks there so they're not walking on the driveway. All multi-unit buildings would also need paved pedestrian access between the building and the parking lot, so people can travel between them, again, without walking along the driveway. And all main entrances would need to be connected to the adjacent street as well with the paved pedestrian path. There would also need to be a paved pedestrian path connecting the upper units of one of the stacked townhouses to the adjacent street. And that's to increase connectivity and, again, just to create a more engaging streetscape. So the plan, as I mentioned, is to build the site out over 3 phases. So the development agreement outlines that each phase has to be complete within 10 years of starting it, and that phase 1 has to be complete within 10 years of the agreement, phase 2 complete within 20 years of the date of the agreement, and phase 3 complete within 30 years. Also, phase 2 and phase 3 can't begin until building permits are issued for the previous phase. So that's to ensure that they don't start all 3 phases at the same time, that they actually go in order. Street A, that new one, going from Jubilee Road to Westmount Heights, would have to be complete before phase 2 begins, and the second street before phase 3 begins. Phase 1 is mostly located on Exhibition Drive and Jubilee Road, so the street isn't required for that phase. The streets would have to be conveyed to the town, and any site preparation except those needed for the street, they could not occur until development permits are issued for that phase, and that's to try and stop land from being cleared too far in advance, only when it's actually necessary. The parkland dedication also, or sorry, the parkland completion has to be done before phase 2 is constructed. There's a section in the development agreement on streets that outlines that streets have to be constructed to the town's local street standards. Existing trees shall be retained when possible, and additional trees shall be planted along the street at maximum 30 feet intervals unless otherwise approved. And also there would have to be pedestrian ramps with tactile paving installed on sidewalks at the intersections as well. So for parkland, there would be 3.9 acres that would be transferred to the town, and that would have to be transferred before phase 2 of the development begins. A main trail through the park connecting Street A to Exhibition Drive would be required, and that would also be required prior to phase 2. And this is because the first 3 subphases in phase 1, they are close to or adjacent to the existing forested area, so even though there's no trail yet, those buildings would still have access to the space. There would also be a second trail required to connect the main trail through the park up to Street B once the street is constructed. Trails would be required to connect the buildings in all of phase 1 to that main trail. And as I mentioned, a mid-block crosswalk would be required across Exhibition Drive if it was approved by the town's traffic authority. With the watercourse in the parkland, a 65-foot buffer would be required, and that's per policy. And this is just a little note I wanted to note in the development agreement that council saw. It mentioned that the parkland work would have to be done before phase 1D, but it's actually phase 2, just a small change. The development agreement specifies that a minimum of 1 vehicular parking space is required per 1 unit. This is less than the required by the land use bylaw, but the developer believes this is in line with the market. The bicycle parking would be in line with the land use bylaw at 0.5 spaces per 1 unit, and the development agreement would state that 50 to 90% of the bicycle parking would need to be indoors. Stacked townhouses and townhouses may share driveway openings, and this is included because it varies from the standards. As discussed earlier, street improvements may be required based on the traffic impact study, so the development agreement references the study and requires an updated study before phase 2, and that timing is because that is when Street A would actually connect to the existing street network. And any improvements, as I mentioned, that are required would be the responsibility of the property owner. For servicing, a comprehensive design report would be required prior to any work at the beginning, And then additionally, detailed submissions for building services are required for every building prior to permit issuance for them. Adequate fire protection would be required. A downstream wastewater capacity assessment was submitted, as mentioned, and any improvements to the town's infrastructure due to the development would be the responsibility of the property owner. Since the timeline of the development agreement is long, the development agreement states that analysis might be amended at time to time based on changing infrastructure conditions. And this is because the capacity issues today may be different than those for later phases. Issues could be exacerbated if other development happens, or the opposite, issues could be improved if upgrades were done in the meantime. The development agreement also states that if provincial wastewater regulations change between years 20 and 30 of the development, there would be an additional contribution required from the developer. And this is because the town doesn't know what regulations might be coming from Nova Scotia Environment, and we don't want to put ourselves in a place that would limit us from adhering to their requirements. There's also no guarantee that any changes would actually happen. And the development agreement includes clauses about stormwater management. A detailed stormwater management report, including a grading plan, would be required, and there would need to be plans required for every subphase after that. A stormwater pond or a similar facility would be required, and it would have to be complete prior to phase 1C. That's because the buildings built before that connect directly into the existing water course. And finally, there are a few additional clauses for amenity space and landscaping plans, solid waste, lighting, and maintenance. There's only one substantive clause, which is the permitted number of units on that 35.44 acres. There's also a partial discharge clause, and that's to account for the long timeline of the development agreement. So if phase 2 or 3 are not complete within the allotted timelines, council would be able to partially discharge the agreement. So in the report, staff provided the option to give first consideration to the development agreement, deny the request for the development agreement, or defer the request back to staff for further analysis. And staff recommend that council give first consideration to the development agreement and schedule a public hearing during council on January 16th.
Mackenzie, just on the phasing, and one of the things that we did discuss was it's a 30-year plan. We don't typically make our planning policies or our land use bylaws for 30 years. So there's a little bit of crystal balling when we're developing the development agreement. I note that the recommendation is that we do it for all 3 phases, so that it's a 30-year plan. Phase 2 starts with 10 years, phase 3 starts at 20 years, so it gets developed out over 30. Understanding the developer is not willing to, and concerned, and rightly so, about trying to nail down elevation drawings and the look of the buildings, because things change over time. And when we think back 30 years or 20 years, things looked a little different than they do today. So rightly so, it would be difficult to kind of nail that down. And in the DA, we do have clauses that say that traffic has to be relooked at with the phases and those things, so that if conditions change around the site from development elsewhere, this doesn't get like a free pass because of the fact that it could have an impact. Was there thought given or discussion given to doing the development agreement such that the development agreement approved the density overall with phase 1 detail, and then phase 2 and 3 to be negotiated through a development agreement as we neared those phases, and there's a little bit more certainty about the community and how it looks 10 and 20 years out?
Yeah, so there was some thought given to that. I think this could have been approached, this development agreement, in a few different ways. We landed on this way for a variety of reasons. So in any case, whether it was done this way or with like a staged development agreement, we'll call it, which can be done, the concept still needs to be nailed down anyway. So the concept plan for subdivision, it would look at the streets and the proposed lots and everything. So that would already need to be done beforehand. And then stage development agreements, I was actually looking at some other examples from elsewhere, and what we did is we kind of took those details and we almost brought them into this development agreement. So sometimes for that approach, you would look at the density, you would look at the permitted uses, you would look at the streets and stuff, and you'd nail down that general concept, and then you'd go into more detail later. But what we did is I was comparing them, and we pretty much took everything we could and put it in this one. So although we don't have building elevation drawings, that's why we put some really specific things about how the multi-units specifically have to be developed to try and actually do a little bit more right now and kind of require them to adhere to a few things that we think will make that streetscape a little bit better. So the main thing that we couldn't nail down that other stage development agreements elsewhere have nailed down is the building design. Other than that, we've captured everything in here. So that includes things like the stormwater management or things like that that would not necessarily be figured out for the development agreement, but are captured anyway in our normal engineering processes, like during permitting. So stormwater management, traffic, downstream capacity. So we kind of met in the middle and took that other approach and put it into one development agreement. Yeah.
I mean, I love the plan looks good. I know some of these are 30 years out, and but it fits with the location. And my thing that makes me most nervous is we're talking about so many unknowns. To the CAO's point, we don't know what the town's going to look like in 20 years. Are we sure that we have captured all those potential? So wastewater is a great example. So are we sure that when they get to phase 3, there's not something we've missed in here that the town is going to have to pay millions of dollars for some kind of upgrade because this has been triggered? Like I know in your presentation it says, there are some provisions for future upgrades or future costs that are triggered by this development, but like if we do this now, are we sure we're not missing anything? Like for example, I'm thinking transit. So what happens if, so we look at traffic and we look at infrastructure. What happens if 3/4 of the people that live here want to use public transit, and we, because of that demand, now need a larger bus or a second bus, or hopefully in 20 or 30 years a 5th or 6th bus, or whatever we have going. Are those things considered? Because I think we would say, oh, traffic, oh great, we didn't need to put a traffic light, so the developers are on the hook for that, but now we got 50 extra passengers a day wanting to ride the bus from this location.
Yeah, so for transit specifically, I'll start with that. In their traffic impact study, they recommended the bus gets rerouted up that street. So it would, instead of, because currently it goes down Exhibition Drive, Jubilee to Exhibition, they would want it to go through their development down to Westmount and then back onto Dufferin Street. There's just nothing we can put into place for a development agreement. That would just be up to the town to do later. So that's something that the town would have to look at. If there ended up being a ton of density in this area, it might make a lot more sense to go down that street than Exhibition, where we don't actually pick up anyone right now except for a few people at the corner near the police station. So that was definitely considered, but nothing that we could put in the development agreement for that, as it would be a town's responsibility to alter something like that. And as you mentioned, traffic is considered. So they already did a traffic impact statement. They looked at a few different improvements that would be needed. Some of them, though, their study showed that it would be needed without their development anyway, so it's not necessarily going to be their responsibility. But the ones that have been captured in their traffic impact study, and that's based on the amount of vehicles that would be coming out of this development, and so that wouldn't change because that amount of units would stay the same, or that amount of people. And we added that trigger that right before phase 2, which is when their street A would connect to our existing street network, they have to update the traffic study. So in case anything has changed, they have to update it, and then our town engineer or our engineering staff would look at that and see if there are any other improvements that would need to be made that would have to come from the developer.
And the DA then captures those costs, make sure that...
Yep, so it says that, I won't read it all, it's a very long clause, but a updated traffic impact study shall be submitted in consideration of the first one. The scope shall be determined by the town engineer, but it specifically says that it shall include the intersection at Centennial Street and Dufferin Street, because that's where that street is connecting to our network. And if any improvements are necessary, the property owner shall be responsible. So it's worded as a capital cost contribution, so it would be based on their impact. It wouldn't be like if if traffic lights were needed in general and they're also contributing to the traffic, they'd have to pay for the whole thing. It's based on the percentage of the traffic that they are adding to our network, but it is captured in there. And then for wastewater, they've already done a downstream capacity assessment, which does show that they do need to do improvements to our existing infrastructure. However, because this is over 30 years, that might change. So as I mentioned, our capacity issues could get better or they could get worse. So that was a little bit harder to capture, but I spoke with the engineering department, and we said that their downstream assessment may change from time to time, and that is because of these changing infrastructure conditions possibly. And it does say that any work has to be done by the property owner. It does say, again, similar to traffic though, that once infrastructure has been upgraded to accommodate their development, they don't have to do any more. And then further to that, we were talking about the provincial wastewater requirements or regulations. We know what those are right now, but in 20 years' time, those might change, and we don't want to handcuff ourselves and say, oh, like you said, like a free pass, like, well, we've written it into the development agreement. They've already figured out what infrastructure changes they need to make. They're off the hook. But now we're saying, no, if those regulations change and we have to do more, the town has to do something different, they will be on the hook to contribute a little bit more, because they might do all of the work that they think is needed, but then down the line those rules change, and so they're going to have to contribute to that. So there were a few different things in there that we believe have captured mostly like based on infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Caldwell.
I guess most of my uncertainties were around traffic. I don't think I've seen the traffic study. It would be nice to see that to understand the issues a little better. But I guess more specifically, I'm wondering about, so would the developer be on the hook for intersection upgrades we need to do that aren't directly connected to the development if they're impacted? For example, Dufferin and High wouldn't be physically connected but may be impacted. Yeah. Would they be responsible to contribute to that?
It depends. So that area, that intersection was looked at in the traffic impact study. So the area that they looked at actually went as far as High and Dominion, and actually went further out of town, but that's out of our scope, just kind of further down Dufferin Street, where Jubilee Road connects, because that's just outside of town. So they looked at all of those, and their traffic impact study done by their engineers said that traffic lights are required there, but it's actually going to be required anyway in the next couple years outside of their development. So based on what their current traffic impact study says, they are not going to have to be responsible for that. That would be the town. However, that's not explicitly included in the development agreement. We've worded it that as per any other development agreement, it is up to the engineering department at that time to determine what those infrastructure requirements are going to be. So that's not actually set in stone what their improvements are going to be, but that's why we also have that second check before they connect to our street network up just off of Dufferin Street to see what they might actually have to do.
So it's fair to say, though, if the signalized intersection's not in place, the town doesn't put that in place in order for this development to connect, that signalized intersection would have to exist? In order, like, so the traffic impact study says that we're going to need a signalized intersection there.
Yeah.
We're going to need it in the next few years, whether this development happens or not.
Yeah.
This development might speed that up a bit, perhaps, maybe, depending on their timing of that. But I guess my question is, if we don't put that in, if the town doesn't put that in because we have other infrastructure priorities in other areas, in order for this development to occur, for those permits to be issued, does that intersection need to exist?
Right. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think that would have to just be further analysis done by the engineering department on the traffic at that time.
So a lot of that detail is at the permit stage as opposed to the DA stage.
Exactly. The development agreement itself is really focused on the permitted use of a site, but there's obviously a lot of things that go in hand with that. So a chunk of the work is done up front, but a lot of that stuff kind of all finalizing of all of those things are done at the permitting process.
Yep.
Question about, so Micmac Avenue would not connect? Is there a reason why they can't connect?
Yeah, it's owned by a separate property owner. So the person who owns that house, it actually extends right to the end of where this property is. So ideally, in the future, it would be able to connect. That's something that would have to be done separately from this development. So they've built it that the street could connect, but there would be a turnaround right now. So currently, we don't permit cul-de-sacs through our town's design and construction standards unless it's a situation kind of like that. And that's kind of why that street is proposed to go there, because ideally we would like to see a better transportation network in that area.
So that was the question I was going to ask. If I pretend I'm Councillor Thorburn for a moment, he would ask that question. We've got a cul-de-sac proposed. We don't allow cul-de-sacs, but we do in a situation where it's unavoidable. Is that?
Yeah, there's variances that the traffic authority can permit, but that's exactly that. So ideally, in the future, we want to see that road connection. So we would like to see a road leading up to that, because then ideally in the future, it would be able to be connected. So if there was no road right there right now, then there would just never be one, even if that property was to be purchased and that road could have been extended.
And that was phase 3 though, anyway, wasn't it?
That's phase 3.
So there might be an opportunity. Homeowner may be willing to sell. Who knows? Okay. Councilor McDonald.
I just wanted to understand your process a little bit better. There were a few occasions where you noted that our requirements required X, but this developer is going to do Y, so that requirement was exempt. How do you get to the point where you exempt it? So one example was the doors or entrance facing Jubilee Road, and because they're facing them inwards, that requirement was exempt. How do you get to the point of saying, okay, we'll exempt that?
So we don't actually have a requirement for that. So that was, I think I would say that staff was looking for here, and we negotiated with the developer to get a little bit lower. So ideally, we started saying we would require entrances on all of those facades, but based on how they anticipate building out those units, it doesn't make sense. For example, those two buildings on Jubilee Road that are quite skinny and long, the shorter end of the building is fronting the street. It doesn't make sense from the interior perspective of that building to have a main entrance there. So we negotiated with them that they wouldn't need that the entrances could be kind of facing. That was the two buildings that looked like this, and the entrances would be facing each other rather than up front. And then, so those aren't necessarily requirements, just things that we were aiming to achieve, and we just took the opportunity to try and, because we don't necessarily have those building elevations right now, we wanted to require certain things so we know that we are not going to only have 10 doors on that huge long strip of street. So that's why we said we would like to see all of those ground floor units have individual entrances, because we're actually going to have a much more engaging building and streetscape with that. Was there any other examples that you can recall?
No, that was the most major.
Okay.
Yes.
Just to that point, so you indicated that you put some urban design kind of standards in place for how it would look and feel. And I guess it comes back to that whole 30-year plan. Do you see that these design standards in 2022 would be relevant in 2042? Or do you, is the concern being, of course, if they're not, how do we get it changed?
Right. So I don't think there's anything that's overly specific in what we've included. Nothing that I don't imagine would be deemed poor urban design. For example, the things that we've done, we've looked at a maximum height, and that was based on what they were proposing anyway. We looked at an interactive ground floor, which is always just going to make a street much more interesting and engaging. We looked at that kind of architectural variation, and the reason was because these buildings are actually quite long, so we wanted to see them broken up a little bit visually, whether that was like physical projections or changing facades. So it could be a subjective approach to design, but it is, again, looking at the streetscape and just making it a little bit more interactive, so I also think that would be in play in the future. Looking at the amount of windows and doors, and that's to make sure there's no blank walls. Again, I think that's applicable. And then that step back for any facades that are facing a public street, that's just to reduce the scale of the building. So there is nothing in particular that we put that is really specific that I think will be poor urban design later. Yeah, and we had to kind of work as well with what is actually permitted already in that zone. There's not a lot of requirements. It's different than the C1 zone, like the one on King Street, where there's actual urban design requirements. So we just kind of had to work with what the zone permits right now.
Jeffrey?
You noted that there's enough flexibility in this agreement to ensure that there was a variety of housing types, and also for the developer to meet the needs of the community as far as housing goes in 10, 20 years. Would it also offer them enough flexibility to decide we're going to go with all apartment buildings, which might change some of the design standards and practices that you want put in place? Could they flip and go with all one type and kind of the exact opposite of what we're hoping for?
Right, so we put a little bit of check and balance in there. So we said the total residential unit count that could be permitted. Then we actually included a maximum of the amount of units that would be permitted in multi-unit residential buildings. It's quite high. It's 822 out of the 886, because that's what they're currently proposing. But we don't actually want to see all multi-unit, because there's not a huge variety in this development. There's a lot of multi-unit residential and then some townhouses. So ideally, we would actually see a little bit more, maybe some medium density. So the way we've worded it is that that is capped, that multi-unit is capped, so it wouldn't change it as much. Everything else would have to be in something smaller than 15 units, because that's how we define multi-unit residential in this. So the intent was to try and capture, I guess, allow a little bit more variation of unit types in the future if they wanted to change it, but there would be a cap on the multis.
That's cool.
A lot of questions on this one.
That's good. These are good. It's a big one.
So phase one would be put in on Jubilee. So I assume that the sidewalks are going to have to be upgraded there. Would any of those costs be borne by the developer?
So unfortunately, there is no sidewalk on Jubilee Road right now on that side, and we can't require them to put one there. So we offered it to them, and we said that there isn't one there. We don't have it in the town's 10-year plan to actually put one there right now. So if you want to see one, you need to do it, but they decided not to do that. So at this point, there wouldn't be a sidewalk there. So that's something that the town would have to look at. If a lot of that development was happening there, it would make sense to put a sidewalk on that side of the street, make sure it was safe. So it's not something that we could put in the development agreement, something the town would have to look at.
Part of that might be addressed with in phase one, they have to put the trail in from Exhibition up, right?
Yes.
They can't start phase two until that trail is complete.
That's right.
With no sidewalk there, you want to be able to redirect people to a safer way to get up. I would imagine we're going to be putting a sidewalk in. Councillor Conklin.
Thanks. Mackenzie, back in March at the public participation meeting, looks like the applicant had mentioned it would be a 20-year construction period.
Yeah, it changed over time.
Okay.
So it was actually going to be, 20 years. They didn't really actually nail that down right at the beginning. That at the time of the PPM, they thought it was going to be 20 years, and so we put that in the original development agreement we wrote, and there was a lot of back and forth with this one. They found that based on just like how long it's taking to get contractors and building costs and everything right now, they wanted to extend that timeline, so they requested that it was 30 years instead.
Okay, thanks.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes. So we've got a large parcel of land that's mixed tree coverage. We've got proposed park. What kind of discussions do you have with the developer about maintaining as many trees as possible? I know it says, should try to where possible, but I guess is there any in-depth conversations about keeping the trees, especially when the streets are conveyed back to the town? We're trying to, maintain as many trees. We have a tree policy.
Yeah, so I just wanted to bring you back to that. So yeah, it's about half and half. We haven't had in-depth conversations. I don't believe we have the ability to require like a certain, like how many trees or how much they have to actually retain. So we always just say it would be best that they do. We have included that they have to plant new trees, and those would be along the streets. And that ideally would just like enhance that street atmosphere. It's good that a chunk of it is forested right now.
Yeah.
I can't really see it on here, but a chunk of it is that parkland.
Right.
So at least that would be preserved, and we've done what we can to preserve this for now. So obviously they are going to have to do some clearing to be able to create those streets. And create the parcels. So the development agreement states that no site preparation, including like clearing the land, is permitted. I think it's until the building permit for that sub-phase has been issued, and so that's to hopefully, so they don't clear that whole land except for the park right now and then build on it later. The only thing they are allowed to do in advance of development permits is clear the area where the street right-of-way is going to be.
Councillor McDonald.
Just to clarify that, the section that's along Exhibition Drive,
Yep.
I don't know if you've ever walked Exhibition Drive, but it's barren. It is parking lots and empty fields, and you can see the end of the road, and it feels like it's getting further and further and further
Yes.
away because there's nothing. And it's a very hot street to walk. There's the trees that are planted there have stayed very small, probably because they're very exposed and it's very hot. So there is nothing we can do to try to maintain some of that tree covering along at least that section of road.
On Exhibition?
Yeah.
So it's not like a huge portion of land that's actually on Exhibition, and it's mostly going to be parkland. So right here, there's that parking lot. So that's actually not part of this property, that little corner one. I guess it's not mostly a parking lot. There's a building there too. And it's only the area, the property line is right there. And I'm just going to switch over to the one where you can see the parkland. So there is, I'll kind of flip back and forth. There is that section where the building is going to be, and you're right, we haven't required any trees on there. However, landscaping plans are required, so there has to be an overall landscaping plan, and there has to be landscaping plans for every phase, I believe. That is always a conversation we can have with the developer to see if there is any ability or interest to retain some of that. I'm just realizing now this is not.
Before you go back,
Yeah.
you've got that 20-meter watercourse buffer.
Yeah.
That dotted line, is that 20 meters on each side of that solid blue line?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a little deceiving. This is actually going to stay forested. This
Yeah, so
chunk
I was
there,
gonna say
so it's not actually being cleared up to the watercourse. I don't know why it's shown like that. I have talked to them about that, and they do plan to retain that. So in here, there's a 65-foot watercourse buffer that needs to be retained as is. So some of that would be up here on Exhibition, but not in front of where that building would be. There isn't much room where that building would be. So I'm not sure how much more they could do in front of the building, but that's a conversation we could have with them to ask if they would be able to put something in front of the building, more trees there. But yeah, that's a little bit deceiving. There is going to be more trees there too.
Does the exit of their trail, is it proposed to line up with the entrance of our trail?
Not quite.
Not quite, okay.
It's just off, but so we have required, they've proposed a mid-block crosswalk. We have put that in the development agreement, and that's a conversation that needs to happen with the engineering department at the time to see if it would be permitted or not, just based on safety. But from our perspective, it would be ideal to make that connection because it's not perfectly lined up. Even if it was, it is connecting you over to the other side of the street, which is where the sidewalk is, and then also where the path to Woodland Gardens is. So it would increase that connectivity of parkland as well as connecting to the sidewalk there.
Councilor McDonald.
Just because we're thinking so many years out, I want to be sure that I understand what would happen if they did phase 1 and 2, 1A and 1B, and then decided the demand has reduced, we're done, and they either wanted to sit on the land, sell the land, whatever. They could be released from the development agreement as long as they had met the requirements of those phases.
Yeah, so it's worded that there is a partial discharge clause, so that is something that we, I don't have it written down specifically, but we've kind of figured that out over the last couple of years, specifically looking at like wastewater capacity issues. There's a lot of density around town that is already like agreed to in development agreements, but that development is not actually happening. But some of the development has happened, and so now we can't terminate the development agreement because it says as long as the use has started, you can't terminate that development agreement. There's been no partial discharge clauses. So for this one, there is a partial discharge clause where if they don't do phase 2 or phase 3 in the timeline allotted, so that 10-year phase within either 20 or 30 years of the date of this development agreement, council does have the opportunity to partially discharge that agreement. So there would still be say they did phase 1, they didn't end up doing the other ones, council discharged that agreement, the development agreement would still be on that one part, but the rest of it would be released from it.
Okay, great.
But they have to complete, those are only in phases. So to
That's right.
Councilor McDonald's point, they can't do 1A, like they have to finish 1, right? You can't partially discharge phase 1,
That's
right? We can only
Right.
discharge, like you can discharge phase 2 or discharge phase 3.
Yes.
But if they do 1A and 1B, but they don't do 1C, we're not discharging the development agreement.
We could if they then never
with-
did anything else. So if they stopped, they don't have to complete the phases
Oh,
before.
okay.
So say they did phase 1A and 1B, and then they didn't do anything else, and then that 20 years passed, then we could discharge it, even though the first phase wasn't fully complete. Yeah, but it is still by phase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other comments? Councilor Caldwell?
This is it.
No, just keep it coming.
Yeah. I will reiterate the concern about the trees, and it seems like council's constantly bringing that up, but we don't have a lot of tools at our disposal. Like I picture that just being totally barren of trees when it doesn't have to be. We should be able to retain as many trees there as possible. I picture even like Jubilee just being stripped of trees, and then they plant a few trees at the end of it when you could have just saved them at the beginning. Anyway, my speech about that. And then, so for phase 1, is there a time limit for when it has to begin?
Let me double check.
Or they can't wait 9 years, can they?
Well, the development agreement would be in place for a year, right? Traditionally, doesn't
For
it?
signing,
For
there's,
signing is a
there's
year.
10 years to complete
Yeah,
phase
so
1.
they don't have to start phase 1 at any point. The development of phase 1 has to be completed within 10 years of the development agreement, so they could start on year 9, but then they'd all have to do it in a year. But then any subsequent phase can't be started until, so like, I'll use this example, no development permit for development within phase 2 shall be issued until building permits have been issued for all buildings in phase 1. So they have to plan to do all the buildings, they have to get to the building permit phase, begin construction, then they can, if that's all done for phase 1, they can finally do phase 2. But yeah, there's no requirement for when they have to start phase 1, except for, I guess, the termination clause that states they have to sign the development agreement in a certain amount of time, which is 180 days, and then they have, I didn't print off that page of it, it is in the development agreement, they have to begin construction in general within, I think this one is 2 years or 24 months, but I would have to actually double check that page of the development agreement. So they do have to, I guess technically they do have to start something, it doesn't have to be a law.
We can figure it
Yeah,
out.
within, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 12 months.
Is it 12 months? Okay.
12 months of the date of the agreement, yeah.
Just want to go back, I'm going to go back to the trees now. So I think it's one of the few development agreements we've seen where they can't tear down trees until they get closer to starting, because what we've seen in the past is they clear it and then maybe it's a year before they work. So I applaud staff on that. I'm looking at the park, like, the development agreement is a great tool for us to put in all the things we want to put in, within reason, obviously. So if I just, because it's been raised a number of times by councilors, I know we can't maybe tell them, you know, you can cut this tree and not that tree, but it would be nice to have something that includes, you know, the parkland must, like, before they start encroaching what they're defining as the parkland, like, staff has to approve something, right? So that our expectation is, when we talk about parkland, in that treed area, we're talking about the trees. I think all of us, our expectation is trees. But a park means very different things to very different people, right? We have parkland that's open, we have parkland that's natural. So I just want to make sure that there's no confusion, so that we're not getting what any developer, I don't want to pick on this one, says, well, I gave you green space, I gave you a park. And we now have a field where we wanted trees. Now, I would expect in this case, it's cheaper not to cut the trees down, but sometimes there's a lot of money in lumber, and they want the lumber, and they want to, it's easier to move equipment around when the land is cleared. So can we look at some kind of provision to ensure that what is defined as the parkland retained, like 90% of the parkland will be retained as treed or in its natural state, some kind of wording that I guess appeases our need to retain this as trees.
Yeah, I actually honestly thought I put that in there. It's been a very complex process. So I will, I am going to look into that because that was actually our intent, was using the word undisturbed. So I will look into that. I will also talk to the applicant. They might have had a totally different impression that I have in my head right now, but that is something that I will look at.
That helps me, yeah. Councilor McDonald?
So, you had mentioned that all of the permits for phase 1 have to be issued before they can get any permits for phase 2. And so I lived in a community in Alberta, and just knowing that our provincial government is hoping to double our population by, whatever year, they're making a lot of efforts to bring skilled tradespeople back to the province. So, if that all works out, anyone who has development agreements is going to be trying to pump these out as quickly as possible, right? I lived in a community in Alberta that was growing fast. It was right outside of Calgary, and they knew Calgary was going to overtake it. So they were throwing up townhouses as fast as they could. I'm pretty sure that they, took a staple gun to the siding and threw a few staples in it to get it done, to get the permits for the next area. Because there was a big problem with not finishing one set of townhouses, which was probably one set of permits, or one phase. So they put some pretty strict rules in place before you could move on to the next phase. However, first windstorm, the siding's gone, the shingles are gone. Our sprinkler system was thrown in the ground really quickly and never worked. They didn't care. They were never coming back to fix any of those things because they got it up, got it sold, and moved on to their next phase. So is there anything in place to keep that from happening?
Yeah, so that would be through our building permit process. So it would work that the first step they have to do is get a development permit, and those would be easily permitted because it's about the use. So once the DA is in place, they can get those development permits, and then once that's approved, they have to get building permit, and there's a lot of detail that goes into that. I can't touch on all of it, but that's that kind of like detailed design phase that we talk about, where not only for buildings do they have to provide all of that information, they have to provide all the servicing information, the street design, like all of those details, the stormwater management plans and everything. So there is checks within that building permit phase and the building inspection, and they have to get inspected before occupancy and all of those things. So that would just be done through those processes.
So occupancy permits would be issued before phase 2 permits could be?
Not occupancy permits. So that's something that other places do. It's a bit trickier for us. We choose to specifically development permits or building permits in our development agreements, since the person who issues occupancy permits works through the municipality of District of Lunenburg. We don't necessarily know when those are actually being issued, so it's caused some problems in the past. So we know internally we issue development permits and we issue building permits, so that's the easiest way to kind of, for us to keep track of it, and for our development officer, who's the one that's going to be ensuring this is all followed, actually knows when the next stage can happen. So they have to get building permits for every single building for phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 before they can apply for permits for the next one. So they have to do a lot of work to be able to even get a building permit. So work has been done, but things aren't necessarily all going to be built. That is, there's various ways it could play out in how it's actually developed. But it's the building permit or the development permit that we use as that kind of trigger.
Any other comments or questions? Is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Caldwell.
I move that council for the town of Bridgewater give first consideration to the development agreement as contained in Appendix A of document 22-029A for the subject property and schedule a public hearing during the regular scheduled council meeting on January 16th at 6 p.m. in council chambers at Town Hall.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Conklin, we've had a really good discussion, so that's good. It's a big, long-term project, so I appreciate the back and forth and staff's being prepared for these questions, so that's great. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor? Those opposed, motion's carried. Thank you. With your indulgence, I'd like to skip down to wastewater surveillance so that Mrs. Buchanan can come down, and then after that, if we can do the grants to organizations amendments so that staff can leave. Unless you, I mean, you can stay. I know you love it, but yeah, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So this evening I was here to discuss with you an opportunity that the wastewater group was presented. It's from Public Health Canada, and in particular it will be Dr. Strang's office and his wastewater surveillance team that will lead it for the Nova Scotia portion. It will be in conjunction with the Wastewater Surveillance Unit 1 Health Division, which is part of Public Health, and also the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. The request has come to the larger municipalities in Nova Scotia that are operating wastewater facilities, and our request is to do some additional sampling which will monitor COVID-2 in the province and give a broader look to what COVID looks like in the particular communities that will participate. Currently, there's actually only one large municipality, which is Halifax, that's participating, and they're giving the overall results right now for Nova Scotia. So what this will help public health do is they will use wastewater-based epidemiology, and it gives them large trends for the entire country. And in particular, this will give a little more additional support to Nova Scotia's trends. It also gives them early warning of disease in the community. It allows them not to rely on people participating directly in the program. So it gives them a broad look at the entire community instead of having to ask people to come to clinics to test and all that. The wastewater captures it all. This has been used broadly in other areas, tracking infectious disease such as polio and several other more minor items. So it's trending very well, and it's a very quick and easy test for public health. If you go on Public Health's website, you can see right now that there's about 62% of the Canadian population of provinces and territories that are represented using this wastewater surveillance tool. And if you look at the Atlantic region, most of their coverage is in the 30% range, while some of the larger provinces, Alberta's up in the 82% range. So the hope from Dr. Strang's group is this will give him a better indication of what's going on across the whole province if he can have more of the smaller municipalities participate. So what the trial would look like is we would give 2 samples per week from our wastewater influent, which is not a big deal because we do sampling weekly anyway, and it will basically present the viral load against a date, and this will go on for multiple weeks at a time, and that information is used to trend short and long-term data on the viral loading in the community. And you'll see the different trends have been presented from the Health Canada's site. So what happens with our results? Health Canada will post them on their website. It's not specific to any area, in particular in Bridgewater. It is the whole community. So it won't target any area at this point, and it will go as basically the town of Bridgewater results. Other municipalities will have a little section of their municipality as well. So you'll see the results of this community up against all the other Canadian communities on this website. And I've left the link in the council package so that if you're interested in having a deeper look at what those trends look like, you can take a look. They're pretty basic, pretty easy to interpret, and they do caution on that website that they're used for a broad look. They're not meant to be an exact science, but they do give an overall picture which trends very close to what you see happening health-wise in the community. So what we would have to do if we were to participate, we would take 2 samples weekly at our wastewater treatment plant in the influent flow. Those samples will be shipped to the microbiology lab in Winnipeg for testing. They control all the results, and they also cover all the costs of shipping and the bottles and all of the testing. So there's no cost to us. It's just simply staff would take the 2 extra samples with their routine samples. It's from our influent flow, and we will probably give them some other additional information which helps them normalize their data. So what they'll be looking for from us is our basic lab data, such as our pH, our total suspended solids. We do collect a lot of inflow information when we have a combined wastewater system, so we'll probably present them that information as well, which helps them basically adjust their results. So if it's in dry conditions, that's their baseline and their best conditions. When we introduce extra stormwater into it, it dilutes the actual reading of the COVID in the results that they're getting. So they can normalize that data and make sure that the trend isn't skewed because we're in a combined system. So we would present that information to them. We would present our population of the community and basically the district or the collection system and what that looks like. So they'll use that to interpret their data a little more accurately. So what we're here this evening for is to get an approval to participate in this testing trial. We believe this will assist the healthcare system collect the data they need in an efficient time manner and help them make informed decisions without relying on people to come for individual testing. And we also think it emphasizes the importance of wastewater in our community, not only the collection but the treatment. And are there any questions?
Any questions? Councilor Taylor?
So, Audrey, is this just an ongoing thing? Like, did they give you, this is going to end in, I don't know, 2025 or?
Right now they
Just
have
wide open.
funding, and federally they have funding till about 2024, but it does also depend on the province and how much they want to rely on this information.
Any other questions? Oh, I think more data, big fan of data. So I think it's good for us to get ahead of these things, and who knows what we may need that data. Is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Caldwell.
Move that council for the town of Bridgewater approve participation in the public health wastewater surveillance trial as presented.
Seconded by Councillor Conklin. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Perfect. Thank you. We're going to go down to 10.1. So Policy 77, grants to organizations, amendments to enable grants for tiny shelters.
Good evening, Council. For my second presentation tonight, I'll be talking about...
May I recuse myself? I have a relative who may benefit financially from this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sorry.
So I'm here for my second presentation to talk about the housing issues in the town of Bridgewater, and specifically looking at amending the grants to organizations formula to enable provision of grants for tiny shelters. So with over 100 households experiencing some form of homelessness, there is a significant need for homelessness responses from the town. And to that end, we have been working with various organizations, including SODA, on tiny home shelters. So these are shelters that are commonly seen behind the Catholic Church currently. They've been pretty successful. We've had positive feedback both from residents, from neighbors, and from service providers. So they've been great so far. Those are a picture of the two existing ones behind the Catholic Church right now. So we'll be looking at very similar sort of units. They're relatively small, really suitable only for one person, not suitable for families. And so we would be looking to amend the grants to organizations policy to enable a tiny shelters program. And so these tiny shelters would receive, applicants could apply, potentially receive funding to provide money to build or buy these units. So we have several special criteria that go above and beyond the normal Policy 77 grants to criteria. Mostly they are around complying with the bylaw and making sure that the shelter is used for its intent and that the residents in the shelter are safe and comfortable. So we look at maintaining the shelter as a structure, that it must be used as a structure, it can't be used for something else. It must include washroom facilities, cooking facilities, there must not be any rent charged for the use of the shelter or the services attached to the shelter. So those will be requirements for the grant. We also have added a section on preferences, and I want to quickly talk about the preferences. These are not requirements, but they sort of indicate to applicants, these are the sorts of things that we're looking for, and if we do have more applicants and we do funds available, this helps staff determine which ones are ones that we should be bringing forward first. So some of the feedback we've heard are things like that the shelter should be owned, not rented, and so that's definitely a preference. We absolutely want them to be owned and not rented. There are possibly some models out there where a church might say, well, we're going to rent that unit for a year, and we don't want to necessarily prohibit that. We want to say preference for ownership, but rental if there's nothing else available. Longer term as well, if there's somebody who's willing to work with us for more than 3 years, we'd be happy to entertain that, of course. And demonstrating commitment to work with other stakeholders. We really want to build a network as much as possible and not have a series of siloed shelters across town. So for one season, one winter, the maximum grant amount would be $1,000. For 3 seasons or more, it could be $3,000 per tiny shelter provided. There's $15,000 available, and we would accept applications until the end of the fiscal year. Although I would hope that we would see some in this near term. Also, I'd note that when we say season, we're talking about November 1st to May 1st. Those are the months where you would commonly see temperatures below 0. So there would also be the requirement to comply with the land use bylaw. The land use bylaw does restrict the number of tiny shelters in residential zones. In institutional zones, it does not necessarily restrict it directly. There may be ways through the development permit process that we can look at if there was a large number that were proposed for a certain site. We're also looking at other affordable housing initiatives, bringing forward a definition of affordable housing specific for Bridgewater, incentives for affordable housing, and potentially inclusionary zoning as well. So going beyond the homelessness component. And I'd be happy to take any questions from the council.
Any questions? Councillor Tanner.
Mike, a bit confused by the intake timelines, I guess. So we've got a note there, accept tiny shelter grants, which will have one intake made where applications must be received before March 1. So are we suggesting that we cannot accept applications after March 1 and look at that September 30th intake? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's correct. So we will be looking at a single intake. Part of the thinking behind the Tiny Shelters program is it is a temporary program. So it's not something that we're necessarily going to be offering every year. So that we'll see where the funding is basically at March. And if the council desires there's a need, then we would look at more funding with another intake. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking, like, what if a couple of organizations pop up and say, jeepers, this is something we'd like to provide before winter comes along, which would be September 30th intake. We'd miss the winter season, so to speak, and have to be forced to wait.
Right. Sorry. So under the current existing policy, we can bring forward applications before if there's pressing need, and I do think that there is pressing need here. Okay. That's the latest somebody can apply. If you apply in April, the money may not be available.
Okay. Got it. Fair enough.
But they can apply in April for the September.
Possibly.
Right?
If there's
so
more
they could
money.
apply months earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's.
You would determine at budget time as well if you're going to look at putting money in the grant program for this. We would decide that on an annual basis.
Okay. Any other questions? I want to applaud staff for taking the feedback and making the adjustments. And I'm just going to probably get ahead of probably what are going to be some comments from people about shelters in the community. I live directly behind the 2 shelters that are in the Catholic Church. It has been a huge success in my opinion. They are fantastic neighbors. I've had 0 issues whatsoever. So I just want to say that because I know people might default to, whoa, like what if there's one in my community or my section of the town? Well, I can just tell you from my experience that since the day 2 people were there, I've not had any issues. So if that helps put people at ease, because we're all in this together as a community. I gave a presentation earlier last week that talked about how much more money it costs for someone to be homeless, costs the taxpayer for someone to be homeless than it costs for them to be housed. So some of the examples were thousands of dollars a month more for them to be homeless, whether they are have to be temporarily housed in jail, in a shelter, in a hospital bed. The example of a hospital bed was $11,900 a month versus a rent supplement, which was under $800, and an affordable housing, which was under $200. So the numbers kind of speak for themselves. So our goal as a community should be to house people. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of share that because I know some people might be a little apprehensive. So that's my piece. Is someone prepared to make a motion, Councillor Conklin?
I move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater approve the policy 77, grants to organizations, as presented in document 22-178B as policy 77 for the town, effective immediately to enable grants for tiny shelters.
Thank you. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Fagier. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome Councillor Caldwell back. I gotta remember where I am in this. So we're all the way back up to correspondence for action. United Way Lunenburg County request for additional bus passes under the free Bridgewater Transit Pass program.
So the council had originally received a request from United Way for, I believe it was 3,000 bus passes, and at that time council was uncertain as to whether or not there would be a need for 3, how many would be redeemed, those types of questions you had. So at the time, council agreed to provide 1,000 additional bus passes. And since then, we've received this correspondence from United Way that shows that over 800 of those bus passes have been given out to organizations for distribution to residents that use their services. So they feel the needs there for additional bus passes to support those organizations and the individuals that access their programs. And they're asking council to consider an additional 2,000 bus passes that would be provided to the United Way, which then would distribute them to the organizations that they support.
Any questions for staff on that? Councilor Caldwell?
Just maybe a suggestion for the future. I wonder if we need to, I don't mind supporting this, but for the future, I wonder if we need to predetermine a number so our partners, such as the United Way, know what to expect from council for the number of passes that we're willing to give out. Because I mean, ultimately, there's a charge for the bus to help recoup our costs. You know, it's not. I don't think we should be giving out an endless amount, and it's also fair to our partners, such as the United Way, that they know up front. You know, here's what we can offer. Just thinking about that for future years, perhaps.
So we do have an agreement with the United Way. I don't know, Mackenzie, if you remember the number that council had kind of set that limit on an annual basis. Was it 2,000?
And I think what happened is...
Yes. 2,000.
Yeah, I think it was 2,000. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's just the last couple of years they've seen a greater need. So that's why they asked for that additional amount, and then they realized it wasn't quite enough again. So that's why they've asked for more, because I think it was the first 2 years. It might have actually increased even the first year. So I think it's just been kind of figuring out how many they actually have been needing.
I do think it's valid to just set that upper limit, because we can't, unless we determine that we want the bus to be no charge, then, which is a discussion I would love to have, but that's a whole other thing. We have to otherwise set an upper limit, I think. Councillor Conklin?
Yeah, I wonder if there's possibly an opportunity here for the corporate community to maybe step up and help subsidize some of these passes for very worthy causes. I don't know. Food for thought going forward.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Councillor McDonald?
Topic of conversation that I recall, but I don't recall where we landed on it. We had looked at the stats of where they were sending the passes to and how many were redeemed, and we had, I think, gone back to them and said, and asked them to look at whether or not they could kind of shuffle their allocation. I don't recall the response, if anyone would mind refreshing my memory on it.
Yeah, I don't know if they reshuffled those though, did they?
I don't know if they reshuffled, because they do it on needs basis. They don't give the same amount of passes to every organization, so they just do it when it's required. So there are probably like 2 or 3 of the organizations that would take a substantial amount of them, and so they always give them more. There's about a 75% redemption rate. Either 64% or 75%. So there was also conversations had about figuring out how to maybe just give out the ones that are going to be used, but they never really know, like, once they give them out to people who need them, the organizations themselves, not the United Way, they're not necessarily going to see them come back, but they do tend to give more to certain organizations.
Yeah, I think it was just a couple, certainly, where we questioned where, like, some organizations, maybe they got 100, but 99 were redeemed, and another group got 50, but 10 were redeemed. And I think that's what council was saying, well, if the group that got 100 needs 50 more, you can go to the other agency and get them. But that's probably a United Way question for them to be working with that more actively.
Yeah, I thought we were awaiting a response to that, or that it had come and I forgot.
Yeah, it may be worth having Michael Graves come to council and talk about, because I'm also curious on how they make that determination on what is the agency, and is it the United Way's threshold for how those passes are handed out by another agency, or is it that other agency? Do you know what I mean? I don't want to pick on anyone in particular, but United Way would have a set criteria for someone who gets a bus pass. Does the next organization, or is it just anyone who comes in the door gets a bus pass? And I don't know if the answer is that should be the way it's done or not, but yeah, there's probably a bunch of questions, but that's for a future discussion.
So somewhat to Councillor Conklin's point, is there any room on that bus, or maybe it's already there, I was just looking at the picture, I couldn't remember, but for the United Way logo and did you know that the United Way or Town of Bridgewater gives X amount of passes and give to the United Way because, like that kind of thing? Is there space for that? See nods, but I don't know.
Yeah, we've got some interior advertising space. I think a lot of it's actually full right now, pretty full right now, which is awesome. But in the past, we've done, we've put things up like the bus schedule or something, just in lieu of anything else being there. So there's the ability to put something in there.
Well, yeah, I was thinking exterior.
Yeah,
oh, exterior?
Much more visible. Everybody sees it as that bus goes throughout the town. And it's just more of a eye catcher to say, I'm driving by, oh shoot, that's right, I should give the United Way, because look what they're...
Right.
I think there's a huge opportunity. Like, we've seen the Chamber and other organizations sponsor a Sunday or a weekend, and I know at one point there was a waiting list for advertising on the bus, because there still is, because the exposure of that, but like everyone looks at that bus still when it goes by. Like, I look at it every time, I almost stop in my tracks, there's the bus. Like, part of it is because it's still a little unique. Part of it is I'm looking at the bus as it goes by. But I'm wondering if there is an opportunity to talk to corporate sponsors, if there's a waiting list. Is there a price point that we can get to where the bus can, almost eliminating the passes, like if there are communities that have shown that they've gone to free transit, at least until it gets large enough that you do need to go back to that. But that free transit eliminates the need for someone to go to an agency to demonstrate that they don't have money, which in itself is not something that is pleasant for anybody. We know that when we do free transit, when we've done it on March break for students, it's been full. And I know we've had a couple of times where the bus couldn't actually put anyone on it because it was so full. I think we had that once or twice for sure. Like, to me, that's an incredible problem to have, a bus so full that you gotta wait till the next one. But I'm wondering if a larger discussion of what would it take to trigger that that eliminates the need for the bus passes, that gets more corporate sponsorship involved, without increasing the burden to the taxpayer. I don't know, that's a long way off from your United Way, have something on the side of the bus that, anyway, that's just.
Be a future discussion.
Yeah, yeah. So I think transit needs to come back onto an agenda, a discussion session, and we can ask if we can include the United Way in that, so they can answer some of our questions and talk to staff about, like, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but I don't know, is the waiting list 20 businesses? Is it 2 businesses? I don't think we even know right now what the new rate is for charging. Is there a threshold that we can go up to?
It's likely, yeah, it would be potentially several years before next year window comes up, because we tend to do either 6-month or year-long agreements with our existing advertisers. So it could be a while before a window comes up.
Wow, it's like season tickets to the Leafs. You gotta wait till the next generation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Motion to, oh, go ahead. So say when we, we'll need a motion to send that to the discussion session and.
Yeah, so we'll deal with the bus passes first, because
Yeah.
that's a now thing, but then we can do have a motion to bring this topic back to a discussion session. Councillor Tanner.
Do you want to make the motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. I move that Town Council of the Town of Bridgewater agree to provide an additional 2,000 free Bridgewater transit passes to the United Way of Lunenburg County, which is in addition to the 3,000 free passes already provided this fiscal year.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Conklin. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. So you need a motion
To refer the topic of
transit to a future
sponsorship. Yep.
Of sponsorship to a future discussion session. Someone prepared to make that motion?
I'll make the motion, Your
Deputy Mayor
Worship.
Frazier?
Yes.
Okay. Did you capture that? Referring
The sponsorship.
transit and sponsorship to a future discussion session. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Caldwell, all those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, sanitary sewer agreement, 5 King Street.
Okay. So this was brought to council previously in camera. And this is what you have before you is an agreement, a draft agreement between the town and Sandra Millman for 5 King Street. So in 1990, the town connected 5 King Street to the sewer system. This involved a submersible pump, as the basement of 5 King Street is lower than the sewer main and the elevation of the sewer main, so a pump is required. Now, in present day, that would be the responsibility of the property owner. If they wanted to connect it to the sewer and their structure was lower than the main, they'd have to have their pump maintain it to provide that. And that's a practice that wasn't in place 30 years ago when this agreement was reached informally with Ms. Millman. There's no written agreement, but there is correspondence to that effect that suggests the town did agree to that with the property owner. So to ensure that the agreement just remains with the present property owner, because the agreement essentially says we'll maintain the pump and we'll pay for the power bill. But we wanted to limit our liability, because since it's in a basement, relies on someone else to know that the pump's failing, as opposed to the town. So we wanted to limit the liability of any damage that could occur if the property owner went away for an extended period of time. And we weren't aware of a pump failure, that type of thing. So this agreement essentially keeps the agreement with the present owner, so it doesn't transfer to a new owner if it were to be sold. That would have to be decided by the town at that time whether or not they are prepared to continue with the agreement. And it limits the liability to the replacement of the pump and not to any damage that may occur due to pump failure that's not the result of town's actions. So this is the agreement. This has been presented to Ms. Millman, and she is in agreement with the terms. And therefore, what would be in order, if council's agreeable, is a motion to authorize the execution of the agreement between Sandra Millman and the town of Bridgewater, respecting the operation of a pump at 5 King Street, Bridgewater.
Any questions? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Caldwell.
I move that council for the town of Bridgewater approve and authorize the execution of the agreement between Sandra Mailman and the town of Bridgewater respecting the operation of a pump at 5 King Street, Bridgewater, as contained in document 22-158A.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor McDonald. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. In your package 9.4, we have Lunenburg County Senior Safety Program monthly report for November 2022. So I would encourage, we've all read it, I encourage the public to read that as well. We just had, this topic came up at the Mayor's Warden's Deputies meeting the other day, just in terms of with increased inflation and housing insecurity, especially for seniors these days, with those who have a fixed income and their income hasn't risen with the cost, that this program is so incredibly valuable and is working with so many seniors that certainly as the municipal units that help support and fund this, we have to be working with the province to see what other supports they can provide for this group, because they're going flat out. So anyway, the report is in your package there for you to review. 9.5, application to purchase land, 48 Glen Allen Drive. So I don't know if you want to just give a quick update for the public.
Just so that, council's received a request from an individual to acquire lot 48 on Glen Allen Drive. This is 9,896 square feet, and council has a policy where there's a square footage cost that would be applied to that of $4.18 per square foot. So the purchase price proposed is the purchase price that the policy would require, and therefore it meets council's policy. There is a buyback agreement that would also be appended to the agreement of purchase and sale, which would essentially state that construction has to start within 12 months of purchase and be completed within 24 months of purchase. So 2 years to see the property developed and built upon. So those are the normal requirements that council has, and if council's in agreement to sell, then the motion would be in order for council to authorize the execution of the agreement of purchase and sale with Mr. Shabelenko.
Any questions from council? Kind of reviewed this already. Someone prepared to make a motion? Deputy Mayor Frazier.
Yes, Your Worship. I move that council for the town of Bridgewater accept the offer for lot 48 Glen Allen Drive and authorize staff to execute an agreement of purchase and sale and related buyback agreement for the property with Mr. Artur Shabelenko, President 4458597 Limited, Nova Scotia Limited, with buyback agreement terms to require commencement of construction on lot 48 within 12 months from date of closing and completion with 24 months of date of closing.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Conklin. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Scrolling all the way down to our last item, this is to give notice for revisions to policy 108 regarding investments. So this will come back to the next council meeting. I don't know if you just had a quick...
Just quickly, council had approved an investment policy in. Since then, it's come to staff's attention that an investment policy, normally policies do not require the approval or the review of the Minister of Municipal Affairs, but this one does. So staff have become aware of that, so they forwarded the policy off to Department of Municipal Affairs to take a look at, and the only concern they had was concern with respects to equity investments and a municipal unit looking towards those types of investments without strong rationale for why and parameters around that. So our Director of Finance has prepared amendments, and those are what you will consider at the next meeting.
All right, someone prepared to make a motion to give notice to that effect? Councillor Conklin.
Thank you. I move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater give notice pursuant to Section 48 of the Municipal Government Act that at the December 12th, 2022 council meeting, amendments to policy 108 investments will be considered.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor McDonald. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. That is the end of our meeting. We have an in-camera meeting to discuss labor relations topic under MGA Section 22(2)D. I have a motion to adjourn. Councilor Conklin, seconded by Deputy Mayor Fergier. We are adjourned.